Did you see the slideshow put out by the new PAC, We Love Minneapolis, where they said the council wanted to withdraw? Basically, the implication was DSA council members, which I guess includes Emily Koski, wanted to withdraw us from NATO.
Well, I have to say I'm more focused on the future of Ward 5 than the future of Article 5. But in practical terms, I mean, I was just looking at the Minneapolis Times, and they have
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, you gotta learn about what these people are thinking. And
we're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Okay, this is the Wedge Life podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Joining me today is Council President Elliott Payne. Thanks for being here.
always a pleasure.
And I should specify Minneapolis City Council President Elliott Payne, in case you thought we were in St. Paul for the day. Do you take some joy seeing their new trash war happening? Are you like, finally something is plaguing St. Paul for a change?
It's always fascinating to see St. Paul in the news because I feel like of all government entities in the state of Minnesota, almost all eyes are on Minneapolis City Council at all times. So I just take joy in seeing somebody else in the news other than me.
It is funny to see the trash war flaring up again. So like I said, we're going to do a lightning round, which means you have to answer these quickly. Some of them are going to have a time limit, one of them, and I will specify that. And let me find my Lisa Goodman sound clip, because if you go over time, I'm going to play.
And I feel like everyone's time is being taken up, including all of the people in the audience.
So that will indicate you have gone over time. Did you hear that?
I got it.
Okay. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
What's Elliott Payne's signature issue?
Alternatives to police and public safety.
What has gone well since you were elected?
The creation of the behavioral crisis response team.
What do you wish you could do over?
I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that.
Nothing you would want a second crack at? You're like, wow, that went bad in a way I think I could fix if I had a second crack at that.
I'm not a regretful person. I just take the issues as they come and do the best that I can given what I have.
What do we talk about too much?
I would say probably city council versus the mayor dynamics.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'm not going to follow up on that because this is lightning round. What are we not talking about enough?
The central executive of the mayor as the sole source of how our city is functioning.
Okay, so related. What has been surprising in your first term?
The emotionality of the work.
I guess first 2 terms. I'm thinking in terms of 4-year terms, but it's 2 2-year terms. Which moment will stay with you?
Probably chairing my first meeting ever as president at the same time as taking up the ceasefire resolution.
Describe the job of council president in 10 seconds or less.
Managing people and relationships, but managing relationships more than managing people.
Least favorite part of your job?
Having to be the middleman between other people's conflict.
And your favorite part of the job?
Being able to be a bridge between people who don't understand each other.
That's the same thing.
It's a paradox.
Favorite local podcast?
I'm going to think about this one because no softballs. I'm enjoying Racket, but I do have to say it's Wedge Live.
Come on, Racket, trying to steal my thunder. I'm going to share my screen on this one. And before I do, it's an ink blot test. So I've smeared a random collection of colored inks on paper, and I'm going to show it to you and say the first thing or things that come to your mind.
Too much money.
Okay. For listeners, it's a mashup of the We Love Minneapolis and the All of Minneapolis logo, the two packs that we have. I thought you would laugh harder at that one. So let's start with the money in politics thing, because you wrote in the Star Tribune about it, and you said, we don't have a strong mayor. I'm paraphrasing. We have a what do we have instead of a strong mayor? We have money in politics.
Strong donors.
Strong donors.
Yep.
And it is. I don't know if people are noticing how remarkable it is, because I think since you wrote that, the other organization that's kind of getting involved now in politics, recruiting for the DFL endorsement process, has become a PAC officially. So we have two PACs founded or run by Frey loyalists, lots of money behind them, like about the equivalent of a mayoral campaign or multiple times a mayoral campaign in money. Like, talking, it's probably going to get into the millions again, especially between the two of them. And like this only really started in 2021, and it seems to be getting worse. And so the point of your opinion, you were essentially saying big money, corporate interests are distracting us from the real questions in an election year. So what is the question we should be asking? And maybe you have further reflections on the existence of these PACs.
I think the first question we should be asking is, what do they want, right? Like, what do they want out of City Hall? Because I think if you follow the money and follow the actual outcomes that they're using their money to advocate for, I think you get a better understanding of Minneapolis politics. And one thing that's notable about that op-ed, I never said the mayor's name, because the analysis isn't about the traits of any one individual. The analysis is about the structure of our local politics. And right now, whoever is getting the support of those wealthy donors is somebody that we should be questioning who they're accountable to.
I feel like the mayor is relevant, though, for me, because I think it is not, if not unique to him, like he's the kind of candidate for whom two PACs would eventually spring up to prop him up.
Well, certainly.
Like, it's not a mistake that they're out there supporting Mayor Frey.
I'm not trying to absolve Mayor Frey from any responsibility within this ecosystem, but I am trying to get us collectively to start recognizing that it's not just a problem with who is mayor right now today, because we could get a new mayor who has the same backing and get the same outcomes that we have right now. So it's easy to beat up on Jacob Frey, the individual holding the seat. But if we are beating up on Jacob Frey, but not making any analysis about who these donors are, then I think that we're gonna just be repeating all of the dynamics that we have today. So
there was a Frey caucus mail that came, and it mentioned Chief O'Hara, and it made me think back to 2021. And like, I think maybe Mayor Frey realizes Chief O'Hara is more popular than him. Similarly, Chief Arredondo was a fairly popular figure and still is. And Arredondo gave that press conference in uniform. Do you worry that our current chief, will play an increasing role in this election year?
I worry that right now we don't actually have Mayor Frey out front in any of the stories that are central to what's happening in City Hall. There's constantly some other figure that is representing the administration, whether it's the chief, the safety commissioner, or any other professional staffer. We don't see the mayor get on the record when he's the singular executive driving the outcomes of City Hall.
You're doing good with short answers. Have you had media training?
No, but maybe just exposure therapy is what does it.
So there's two stories we can tell about what's going on right now. There's one that's favorable to the mayor. The city council keeps getting in the mayor's way, amending the budget in a way he doesn't like, pretending the police budget isn't up by $50 million since 2022. A lot of people like to... The rhetoric would have you believe that police are just dealing with the city council that is cutting. The planning for George Floyd Square, like you guys have gone in a direction towards pedestrianization. The mayor was like, well, we spent all this money and planning, and the neighborhood wants it this way. You're delaying this. And then there's another story where we've got a mayor who doesn't work well with others, who thrives politically, on showdowns with the council. Like, he likes the idea of saying my way or the highway. And then if the council says no, that's good for him too, because he can, pin the blame on the council. So what story what story is true?
So a dynamic that I've actually seen, and this is a dynamic that I've only really been able to pay attention to in my role as president. I didn't see it as clearly as a minority member of the body. But the story that's very true is when the mayor takes a position, well, first of all, he really leverages strategic ambiguity on a lot of topics. Even in his veto letter about George Floyd Square, he said he supports a pedestrian mall. So it's like, if you support a pedestrian mall, why are you vetoing the legislative action that we need to do to follow state law? Which, by the way, obscures the fact that even his open flexible plan would require that legislative due diligence to be able to deliver on an open flexible plan, because as soon as you close the square for pedestrian access only, even if it's only on anniversaries or dates of significance, you still need to go through the exact same legislative steps as closing it for a more permanent memorial mall. So that level of strategic ambiguity allows him to basically never get on the record about what his firm position is on an issue, especially when those positions are counter to perhaps some of the wealthier donors that are within our ecosystem. And then city council exists as this piñata that you can use to deflect any level of accountability for what positions you take. And so I think this dynamic plays out whether it's on George Floyd Square or neighborhood safety. Like, where's the mayor in this story? What is his position? Is he on record advocating for a position? Is that position popular amongst his donors, or is it hostile to his donors? And then how can he get out of really saying, I'm going to take this tough choice easy? Say, I would take that choice, but for this radical city council that doesn't let me do my job.
So I think the mayor would say, well, we did this whole process. We spent a lot of money. There was engagement, and the neighborhood didn't want the pedestrianization of George Floyd Square. Like, I was open to it. I would have supported it, but the neighborhood didn't want it. You get into this thing with public engagement where it's so tedious to argue over public engagement because you're going to find strong opinions on both sides. I can understand frustration in the neighborhood that we are not able to get on with this. I think that sentiment seems real to me. What do you say to people who are like extremely frustrated that we can't move on with this and they think we're just never going to get this done?
I think anybody who's spent real, authentic time in the community surrounding George Floyd Square knows that there isn't consensus. There isn't the neighborhood wants X. There are very strong and valid perspectives for a number of options. And I think what's missing right now is leadership that is helping shape the direction that we're going to go in around a vision that we can all share. And I think there are things that exist that we all share. We all share a vision of deeper investments in the square, both not just from like infrastructure investments, which of course we want to reconstruct that intersection. It's long overdue, but we're talking about economic development. We're talking about grants for small businesses. We're talking about a neighborhood association that has stepped up and had to do a lot of free labor that goes uncompensated. And we're talking about historical disinvestment that goes back to redlining, the bulldozing of black neighborhoods on the south side. All of those historical harms, let alone the present harm of witnessing the murder of George Floyd, are still unaddressed. And there's a vacuum of leadership to step in and actually bring a community along towards a shared collective vision. That's the piece that's missing, and that's where you see, I feel like the mayor's absent in this conversation. He delegates it off to frontline staff who take on a lot of emotional labor, putting themselves in between conflict within community, conflict between professional staff within the administration, conflict between the elected leaders. Like, the mayor needs to step up and actually stick his neck out and take a stance towards something. And it's just so much easier to hide behind staff or hide behind, oh, there's this city council that is unagreeable.
I feel like this is just how he operates. He didn't get along with the pre-2021 council either. And so I think of the 2040 plan, which is a much different issue, but like he has owned that in the wake of its passage. But at the time, he wasn't out front. I heard he was he was getting weak in the knees over the single family zoning stuff. Like he owns it now, but at the time he was not at the front leading the way, trying to change public opinion on it. So it's a little frustrating to see him take ownership of it now. That's just he's not an out front kind of leader.
Well, and that's what strategic ambiguity affords you. Once an issue has been settled and been celebrated, now you can take credit for its success. And if something doesn't work out, you can distance yourself from the failure.
Yeah. Do you struggle with being council president and also being a council member? Is that demanding? What are the demands there?
It's a really hard set of priorities to balance. One of the things that we did at the end of the last term is we budgeted a third staffer for both the president and vice president. That's helped tremendously. The amount of extra work I need to do when it comes to managing relationships amongst council, managing relationships between council and the mayor, managing relationships between, the cabinet level and council it's a job all on itself before you even get into making sure that you're prioritizing time to go down to Lowry Avenue before construction happens and meeting with the business owners at, Lowry and Central to, hear about what the impacts are going to be for them. And so it's really hard to be in all places at all times. That third staffer really helps go a long way. And it's just really demanding, and I just don't have free time. That's just the reality of it.
So there was Jeremiah Ellison, Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison, had a quote that I enjoyed about the council mayor dynamic, about the mayor having the council having priorities that the mayor won't implement. Like, you pass something, you fund it, he won't implement it. And then the mayor having priorities that the council won't fund, and like that failure to come together. And I saw on your website you mentioned the safety ambassador program that you funded as a council and the mayor has not implemented. Why does it have to be like that? Is there a solution for that dynamic?
Well, I mean, one of the points of reference that I made in my op-ed about the impact of wealthy actors within our political ecosystem was this connection to Elon Musk, which, remember, Elon Musk was a celebrated figure in Democratic circles throughout the Obama era, right? It turns out that we're learning a lot about the difference between executive and legislative power by watching dysfunction happen at the national level. And we're learning about new words like impoundment, right? Where the legislative body made budget allocations that the administration is obligated to implement, but we're seeing an administration at the federal level that is discrediting the legislative body completely. And that's effectively what happened when we passed our budget for safety ambassadors. The administration decided they didn't want to implement it. And if you recall, the money that we had set aside for these new safety initiatives was trying to be repurposed into raises for the police. And we actually had to go to, and this is one of those things that's really frustrating about this moment. We hear about like the conflict between mayor and council, but the reality is that when council passes an action, the mayor either signs it, vetoes it, and that veto either gets overridden or is sustained. Either way, the outcome of that is a combination of council and mayoral action that counts as the action of the city, not of one branch or another. So when we passed a budget that included safety ambassadors, that was an action of the city, of mayor and council combined. And when the mayor and administration on the tail end decides not to implement those, you have to question, is there respect for this form of government that we have? And it's this bigger, broader question that we have that's becoming more and more urgent as we're watching things unfold at the national level. We don't want to see that dynamic at the local level.
Well, we have that dynamic at the local level. Is there like a legal solution to that?
This is something that, again, when you ask that question about what is it like being a council member versus the president, this is very much a thing that I'm trying to take on as president is, really embrace the fact that the voters decided on reforming our government. How do we make that work in a really high functioning way? Right now, it is a completely dysfunctional implementation. And I save on my phone this picture of one of the mailers that said, here goes the council's plan for the ballot question, and it was an empty notebook. And of course, that was the wealthy donors dunking on question 2, an approach of comprehensive safety. But it turns out that question 1, the strong mayor question, is the one that didn't have a plan at all. It's completely dysfunctional. And I'm trying to bring some competence to it.
Yeah, 'cause with question 2, we would have arrived afterwards still with the same police department, and we would have built onto that the other public safety functions. With strong mayor, it feels like we really just had, I guess we had a mayor, but it kind of feels like a blank slate. One thing that I was paying attention to a ton a couple of years ago that just went away, and I don't know how it happened, was the police buyback contracts. I remember the public uproar. I remember there was more scrutiny in your legislative directive, and then it just stopped happening, and I can't say I understand why it stopped happening. Can you explain why?
Honestly, it was because, and this is actually one of the prouder things I am of what I did in my first term in the minority. It came from a heightened level of scrutiny and oversight of that process that led the administration to just quietly stop accepting them. Now, the other thing that also quietly happened is we stopped taking buybacks that were associated with neighborhood associations or other community-based organizations, businesses, small businesses, but we still have them for instance, bomb detection for Vikings games or bomb detection for large events. And so they just stopped calling them buybacks because the name got toxic. So you'll see it on an agenda and it's a contract with the police department for bomb detection services. And I think that our oversight of that was really grounded around you shouldn't get better services just because you are in a wealthier neighborhood that has a neighborhood association full of people willing to pool private dollars together. Everybody should get equal access to safety in Minneapolis. And so that style of buyback contract has not come before us ever since we brought that level of scrutiny.
Yeah, it makes sense. It is truly a public safety issue to protect like a sports stadium. And you should probably make the sports team owner pay for that because he's a billionaire. But I don't know if directing, it was always seemed terrible to direct police services towards relatively safe but high wealth neighborhoods.
Right. And I think this crisis of safety that became the central focus of a lot of the narrative, what changed after COVID, after George Floyd was murdered and the subsequent uprising, was not that crime just increased, it did, but specifically it increased in areas that had not historically experienced it before. Right. I actually just went home to visit family in Milwaukee for a funeral, and I stayed the night in my childhood home. And the neighborhood that I grew up in, Milwaukee, was a very high crime neighborhood, a lot of gang activity. I'm not entirely sure what the dynamic is today in terms of like gang activity, but I forgot what it was like to go to bed with random screaming happening outside and you not knowing, is that like danger to me or is that just kind of in the background? And that's something that I just grew up with as like kind of a normal part of my upbringing. And it was only after, living here in the sleepy hollows of Northeast Minneapolis where you kind of see the contrast of that. And I think there's a lot of neighborhoods in the city of Minneapolis who experienced that kind of disruption for the first time. And I think that also played a role in how these narratives kind of started to develop.
Yeah. There is something to people with privilege or who aren't used to something, seeing it for the first time. That's kind of my origin story when I moved to Minneapolis as a white
Florida
guy
man.
from from the suburbs from South Florida and went to a neighborhood association as a renter. And I hear all this talk about renters, and it's something I had never experienced before. And it made me so angry. And that is why I got involved in local politics, because I felt like they're talking about me and I don't like it. So maybe that's the positive side of white rage.
Sure.
Okay. So we've had a good first 2 or 3 months of the year crime-wise. I pay attention to robbery stats because those were like through the roof in like Whittier and the Wedge last year here in Ward 10. Mm-hmm. And it's gone down quite a bit. I think lowest since 2019 citywide and in my neighborhood and the surrounding areas. Like what should we attribute that to? Because I think you could make a positive case for Mayor Frey. Say after 2 terms, police staffing is going up, crime is going down. He's implementing his agenda. But what story would you tell about that?
I think that any conversation about crime or safety needs to be grounded in truth. And one of the truths that we need to acknowledge is that we went through a once-in-a-generation pandemic with a once-in-a-generation, police murder, with once-in-a-generation uprising, all while, people were losing jobs and getting evicted left and right. Even with an eviction moratorium, there was a lot of displacement that was happening. And interest rates going crazy. There's a lot of causal factors to this, and a lot of the conversation got grounded in funding police or what the police staffing level is. And I think if anybody should take any lesson from the last 5 years in the city of Minneapolis is that police is a component, but when you're looking at a big picture data perspective, the causation correlation with police staffing, it's almost like they're divorced. It's almost like people having secure housing and secure jobs that can afford rent might have more to do with the livability of our city than the absolute number of police officers on the force. And I think that we're getting into an era where we can have a more honest and mature conversation about that.
Honesty and maturity, I hope so. Is 900, was that the pre-George Floyd number, the staffing number at MPD? Was it 900?
I think it was authorized to like 888, but I don't know that we'd ever actually made it to that staffing level.
And are we around like 500 now?
Up 550, maybe even getting closer to 600. We've actually added more police than lost for the first time in the last year.
I do think it will tell some kind of story if we end up with like 29 pre-2020 like robbery and violent crime numbers with staffing that is, I don't know, down by a third. Police staffing is down by a third.
Right.
Maybe it is not so connected. The recent drama with the neighborhood safety department, I was incredibly frustrated to have the accusations and counter accusations about favoritism with contracts. That was directed at the council by the community safety commissioner, by the ex-leader of the neighborhood safety department. At the same time, the Star Tribune is reporting, oh no, it was the neighborhood safety department director that was doing the favoritism. I don't feel like that story got told on TV, at least. Star Tribune was telling some of those stories. This is a dumb question, but why did that conversation have to happen?
Well, the first question is, was that conversation happening in good faith or bad faith? And, we have a saying, no one council member has any power, not even the president. We only have power as a body. And so we only get to make decisions collectively. So no one council member can have a favorite vendor to choose a contract for, or, we can't play favorites, because even if you had a favorite, you're only one vote. You have to have a broad coalition of people that are interested in supporting your favoritism. And this is not a conversation that's ever happened on city council around picking favorites. The conversations that we have had on city council, which are out in the public and all of our meetings are on record, and I feel like I saw somebody post something like, hey, have we ever thought about the dynamic that all of city council's meetings are public, whereas the mayor gets to meet in private? And the conversations we've had in public is around, our needs in our community. So like my need is around Lowry and Central Avenue. That's where a lot of livability issues come from. That's what inspired me to make investments in a safety ambassador program. At the same time, I can acknowledge that even with the livability issues on Lowry and Central, those are very different than some of the challenges on Lake Street. Those are different than some of the challenges on West Broadway. And so those are the types of conversations that we have in a very public and transparent way. And so we talk about the need and we talk about our geographies as they relate to our wards and the hot spots that we are familiar with. And we try to allocate resources accordingly. There isn't some behind the door conversation that can happen that can have one council member who has a favorite that they want to pick that ultimately leads to a majority vote that supports that. We have to have those conversations in public, and I think the public sees those conversations even when they're messy.
I believe it was Anton Schieffer who posted about that after I posted something.
Sounds right.
And because you're right, the council has a lot of meetings, and you can always get video of a council meeting to run on TV, and you can get a video of a council member objecting to a different council member's argument, and sometimes it gets heated, and you can make it look like the drama and the wrongdoing and the controversy is always happening on the council side, and the mayor can just pick and choose when he wants to pop up from his office and appear on TV, and he can make sure it's only the good stuff and none of the bad stuff.
That's right.
There have been a lot of things in this term, I think, and maybe the previous one, that I have never seen before at council meetings. Sorry to bring up council drama, but Reverend McAfee at that meeting, I have never seen anything like that. I remember when Roxanne O'Brien told Council President Barb Johnson to get her shit together in like 2016 or 2017. It was like punctuating her testimony with "get your shit together," and that seemed like the biggest deal in the world at the time. Mm-hmm. And to watch Reverend McAfee just go off like that and then do a live stream where he's like, I won't shoot if I don't have to, and you're acting like a girl. And then for him to be up for a contract shortly after, do you think that performance and the things that happened there should have disqualified him from being up for that contract?
Well, I'll first say that any level of homophobia, threats, anything like that is just totally unacceptable, and it's not appropriate to disrupt a council meeting. And he's not the only one to have ever done it, and we have a kind of a set of strategies to try to either mitigate it from happening in the first place or respond to it when it does happen. And you've probably seen this happen in a number of different settings, right? So the best case scenario is you can get in touch with somebody ahead of a meeting and try to, de-escalate so that disruption doesn't happen in the first place. That's actually something that I did do. I had reached out to Reverend McAfee after he had disrupted that budget meeting, and I just emphasized the importance of I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, but you are not helping your cause by disrupting like this, and we have to take this item up in our full council on Thursday, so please, let's be civil. And he was actually in the back of the chambers on that meeting trying to quiet down his supporters who are starting to disrupt. So the best outcome is when you can get ahead of it and de-escalate. But, some of the strategies that we try to deploy to keep meetings functional is progressive intervention. So the very first thing what we'll do is, maybe just gavel, right? And just ask somebody to be quiet, escalating up to recessing so that we can shut the cameras off, because sometimes people are just looking for their 15 minutes in the spotlight, all the way through to we could have security clearing out the chambers. And I have never cleared the chambers out. It's actually something I aspire to have the chambers be a welcoming space where the public can participate in the according to the rules, which is like you can't disrupt. But I want people to be able to come and watch council meetings without, shooing them away just because they don't like the vote. But, we try to move through those steps sequentially so that we don't go straight to the most intense intervention. But, we have had to ask at least an individual to leave before. And it's just really unfortunate to see how some of these more toxic dynamics that are unfolding at the national level, they're starting to trickle down to the local level. And I think it's going to really take all of us. And it's particularly on the chair. It's like my job to manage the meeting and manage the space. But, collectively as a society, as a country, we have to figure out how to work together, and we have to figure out how to move forward. And it's really disheartening to see these types of events happen here locally.
It is my hope that when you move back to City Hall for your meetings, that we can increase the capacity of that room, because it felt like the capacity went down, and it maybe is justified by the pandemic initially, but then it never went up. And it felt like increasingly difficult to get into the actual meetings. So I'm putting in a plug for increasing the capacity in the council chambers. Let's talk about rent stabilization. I'm sure you have heard that St. Paul is doing, it sounds a little weird. They're going to apply it to everything 2005 and older, potentially, if this deal goes through, in combination with, so no rent control on any new construction from now until forever, only 2005 and earlier, in exchange for some renter protections. I think just cause eviction, they're going to make another attempt at that after landlords had, I think taken that to court. That's how they defeated that. I do not want to go what St. Paul has gone through over the last several years. You mentioned rent stabilization as a priority on your website. I think there's a good argument for it as like a common sense consumer protection, the good old Joe Biden style. We're not going to let these people gouge you. And I think it was even in the Democratic Party platform, presidential platform. Is that right?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
I'm of two minds on it. Like, I want more housing to be built, despite the fact that the people who build it are largely very wealthy white guys with terrible politics. I think we just have to build more housing. That's just unquestioned good. But these very strict versions that some candidates are supporting have me concerned about following in the St. Paul experience. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think the first things first is to dispel some myths about rent stabilization. And I think myth number one is that the purpose of rent stabilization is to keep rents low. Rent stabilization is a powerful tool for preventing displacement, right? That's what its number one policy outcome is that people don't get 40% increases and now can't afford rent anymore and now are getting evicted. And the other thing that I think people need to understand about rent stabilization is that the objection to it isn't about capping revenue. The objection to it is about developers' fear of getting access to capital to complete the financing for future projects. And so they worry that a jurisdiction that adopts any rent stabilization of any kind is going to spook bankers out and have them no longer invest in that jurisdiction. And so it's important to acknowledge both the goals that you are trying to do and the actual unintended consequences that are at risk, so that you can actually design a policy around some of those considerations. And so I think one of the unique differences between how Minneapolis is approaching this versus St. Paul is they did the policy work up front, and then they put a full policy on the ballot, yes or no. We put the ability to create policy on the ballot. And so we're in a position where we can actually sincerely engage with both the aspirations of what a rent stabilization policy is supposed to accomplish and the fears of what a rent stabilization might do to the housing market. And I think that's why you haven't seen something come forward yet, is because those are the types of conversations that we're having with our professional staff internally, so that when we are ready to bring something forward, we've thought through some of those considerations.
So those conversations are still happening.
Yeah. So for instance, one of the things I was looking into last term was the creation of a municipal bank. And a lot of people see a value in the municipal banks as helping get access to the unbanked, which certainly would be one of our goals. But one of the things that I'm pursuing it for is through the lens of housing policy, of if the risk of a rent stabilization, whose benefit would be to prevent displacement, is that it might make lenders less willing to lend in Minneapolis. Well, why don't we become the lender of choice for housing development through a municipal bank? And so these are the types of a little bit more nuanced approach that we have the opportunity to pursue. That is why we're thinking through those things right now.
Do you want to be council president again next term?
Yes, because there's a lot of projects that I'm working on right now that are going to take more than 2 years to really follow through on. And they're not very interesting projects. They're not very sexy projects. Like, we don't have a really strong platform for managing policy. And so what we have is a smattering of random Word docs and PDFs of unknown origin and unknown accuracy that outlines how we execute policies and procedures internally. And embedded in that is a power struggle between the legislative branch and the executive branch of who has the authorship authority to really define what a policy should be. So whether that's the policy and procedure manual for the MPD, which I think we have litigated quite extensively, all the way through to procurement, and what is the vendor selection methodology for picking contractors. As you can see in things like neighborhood safety, this is like an urgent thing that needs to be resolved, but it's not something that is headline grabbing, and it's not something that is really easy to campaign on. Bringing rigorous workflow to city government is not exactly a thing that is all that compelling, although I guess that's the argument that DOGE is making, although we know that that's just an exercise in dismantling our federal government, not an exercise in efficiency.
So you think you can do that in a way that sticks beyond Elliott Payne?
That's my intention, is to set up systems in place that can serve anybody who is in the role of president, anybody who's in the role of mayor. That's going to lead to just better outcomes for the residents of Minneapolis, regardless of who's holding these chairs.
You mentioned earlier the Israel-Gaza resolution. At your very first meeting, welcome to being council president. And I think when we look back decades from now, we will see student protests in a different light than we do currently. Student protesters are always vilified in the moment. And of course, some of them say things we disagree with, some of them do things we disagree with, but the overall movement, being anti-war or thinking maybe innocent people shouldn't be indiscriminately bombed, maybe that's a bad thing. We see them as we admire our student protesters in retrospect. And in the same way, I think if you have any political power, maybe you should use it to stand up for the things you believe in, even if you don't have direct control over the military or foreign policy. I thought it was fine that the council would take something up like that. How do you convince people that it was the right thing to do, aside from the case I've made for it? Are people still upset at you for that and upset at the council? Do you hear about that?
I don't hear about it as much as some of my other colleagues do. I think some of my other colleagues are still hearing about it. I had lots of really deep conversations with my constituents at that time, especially ones that were really invested in it. And those were really substantive conversations that were really in good faith. I had mentioned that I was in Milwaukee recently. I was there for a funeral, and this was a family friend. Her name's Helen Robertson, and she passed away due to MS at a fairly young age. And it's one of those things where it's only on somebody's, it's somebody's memorial service where you start hearing the stories about their life. And she was a protester in the 70s at the University of Wisconsin, and the University of Wisconsin has an African American Studies program because of her activism. And I think that we're going to look back, 50 years from now for some of the activism that's happened, and we're going to see similar types of outcomes. And I think that in particular, when we're looking at people like Mahmoud Khalil, who was arrested for being an organizer of protests at Columbia, if we are going to start arresting people because they disagree with our government, where does the line stop? Right? Like, is it going to stop at green card holders? Or is it going to continue to progress until every one of us are subject to being disappeared by our government? And that's authoritarian, and it's completely antithetical to everything that we stand for as Americans. And so if we don't stand firm today when it's easy, it's going to be lost. There's going to be no hope when it's hard, and it's getting hard already right now.
Did you see the slideshow put out by the new PAC, We Love Minneapolis, where they said the council wanted to withdraw, or basically the implication was DSA council members, which I guess includes Emily Koski, wanted to withdraw us from NATO. They want to free all the prisoners. I forget whether they want to defund prosecutors, things that I have never in my life heard come up at city council meetings. There was no mention. I thought it was interesting. There was no mention of Israel, Gaza, and I'm like, did they decide that wasn't? Have current events made them decide that is no longer a fruitful line of attack?
Well, I have to say I'm more focused on the future of Ward 5 than the future of Article 5. But in practical terms, I mean, I was just looking at the Minneapolis Times, and they have
Don't do that.
Well, you gotta learn about what these people are thinking, and they have a council tracker, and they have me in the same bucket as Jameson Whiting. Down in Ward 11 as neo-socialists.
Neo-socialists. I guess that's to make you sound like even more dangerous. It's like neo-Nazi, only neo-socialist.
Well, so the caucus is on April 8th at 7 p.m. In my ward, it's going to be at Edison High School. And that's where we get to go develop our party platform. And I've been DFL endorsed every election since I ran in 2020. I'm seeking the DFL endorsement again. And when we accept our party endorsement, we're aligning ourselves with a party platform. And the DNC party platform is actually uncomfortable to me when it comes to some of these topics of, having the most lethal fighting force in the world, right? That's something that Kamala Harris said, and it rubbed me a little bit weird to hear that. And the place where we resolve that tension is through engaging in party politics, engaging in the caucus, bringing forward resolutions that can be adopted through a democratic process. And so as we think about that exercise, we are aligning ourselves with coalitions that are broad so that we can win, right? And part of the DFL coalition right now also includes the Democratic Socialists of America, who also go through a process to adopt their platform. Now, are we debating the future of NATO on city council? No, we're not debating the future of NATO on city council. And I think it's actually quite bad faith of some of these organizations to try to create these litmus tests to divide us, when what we should be doing is uniting around fighting a really hostile federal government right now. And it's actually interesting. Just today, the reason I was reading the Minneapolis Times is because somehow I got signed up to their newsletter. And guess how I got signed up to their newsletter?
Oh.
They took the unique email that I created solely to keep eyes on all of Minneapolis, and all of Minneapolis gave their email list to the Minneapolis Times. And so it just shows how the Minneapolis Times and We Love Minneapolis and all of Minneapolis are all intertwined in one giant ball of wealthy interests who have very specific outcomes that they want out of City Hall. And anyone that is not aligned with their for-profit expectations is an enemy, and they're creating a culture war right here at home to try to divide us instead of trying to unite us to fight a federal government that is absolutely hostile to our values.
I have heard that from other people about I have this very unique email that I only use for this organization. So you're repeating what I have heard. And, oh, look at that. It gets spread to another. I've noticed them more intentionally linking to each other, whether it's the Hill and Lake Press and all of Minneapolis promoting some of these articles in their newsletter. I don't think they're taking the right approach if their goal is to win a council majority. In addition to the fact they don't have good candidates, I don't think they have a positive agenda. They are against things. I couldn't tell you what they're for. They're here to stop things. So in 2021, we elected a city council that is further to my left. Like it's further left than me. I'll admit that. But when I look at the council members on the, if we're going to call them moderate, the moderate side, they have no agenda. I can't tell you what they stand for. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish. But on the progressive side, we have council members who are trying to change things. At least they recognize that there are things we should be trying to change. And like, I can work with that. I can have that conversation. A lot of people saw Lisa Bender as a dangerous leftist. And, you know, I thought she was more of a technocrat. So they say they want to win a majority. They're not even trying to win a majority. They're going to have 3 or 4 council members that they like next term too. I think that's the direction we're going. And the question is, are we going to have a mayor who is willing to work with the council, or we're going to have standoff for another 4 years?
Well, I'm going to be a not well media trained nerd here and say it's Schrodinger's city council. We are both all powerful and the cause of all of Minneapolis's problems, and we actually have no power to do anything, right? And so if you actually watch some of the folks that are challenging, especially the progressive council members, they're saying how they're going to solve crime, bring vibrancy to commercial corridors. They're going to accomplish all of these goals, right? And what they don't understand is that city council doesn't really have the authority and the leverage to really create those kind of outcomes on the ground. We can pass budgets, and as we discussed already earlier, those budgets can be completely ignored by this administration. And it's very odd to me how anybody could criticize how our government is getting run and not mention the mayor, right? I am very open to criticism, and I'm not sitting here saying that I've done everything correct and that I have all the answers, but I think that an honest assessment would require some acknowledgement of the role of an executive mayor in the outcomes of day-to-day like living in our city. And so if you're seeing problems of crime in your neighborhood, or that the police aren't responding in time, that's not because a majority of city council stood up on a stage in front of a sign that said defund. The majority of those people are not in power anymore. They don't exist within our ecosystem anymore, right? The issue there is not something that can be solved through the like bringing donuts to roll call form of being a council member. It's something that has to be solved by really wrestling with the root causes of some of these challenges. And I think that somebody who is making the types of claims or promises about the kind of change that they can bring as an individual council member severely is overestimating the role of a council member and is underestimating some of these causal forces that are outside the purview of even local government. And I think an honest assessment needs to say what's within our control, what's not within our control. How do we actually work together to change what's in our control towards better outcomes? And anybody who's not talking like that is hard to take seriously.
Another example of a case where people were pushing for change, willing to make change, and the change happened. The Uber and Lyft thing. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of criticism, like, oh, the council is pulling these numbers from their butts. They're ignoring the data. They're being radical. But on the other side, you had council members who didn't want to do anything, who just want to leave it to the state.
Yeah.
And I mean, if what the city council... In retrospect, the city council taking action, whatever you think of the process, forced the state legislature to do something, forced the governor to get in on it and sign it. And I don't know, you took a lot of heat for that as a council. The outcome was good. I haven't heard anyone talk about that recently. Is that a selling point for the city council this year?
Honestly, I think the Uber and Lyft minimum wage fight was one of the most profound, meaningful things I've ever done in my life. And the reason I say that is because there is both a substantive and a rhetorical reason to say, oh, the state should take that on, or the county should take that on. And the reality is that the challenges that we're facing as a society exist because nobody has taken it on, right? And one of the things that's really unique about being on city council in Minneapolis is that we're full-time, and we can move really powerfully when we're together. And these are topics that have been discussed for many years around the exploitation, especially of gig workers, let alone the exploitation of our immigrant community, of Black and brown people who lack a lot of power within our ecosystem. This is like a problem that we've admired for generations, right? When are people going to actually do something about it? And I'm really proud that we were a majority that was willing to do something about it. And we did something about it in the face of some of the most powerful corporate interests in the world, with some of the most resources in the world. And it was actually very scary. And I moved in a way that I recognized I could have never been reelected again. Had Uber and Lyft actually followed through on their threat to pull out of the market, I could see that as a career-ending event for an elected person. I remembered before I was elected, when the city was just trying to create a license and regulatory framework for Uber, that I think I was one of those Uber users that emailed my city council member in outrage that how dare the city do this thing to like make Uber go away. Well, nobody's making Uber go away. Uber and Lyft are choosing to abandon communities that don't bend to their will. And I'm just really proud that we stood up to that, and we were able to not only pass a strong minimum wage for the city of Minneapolis, but something that led to protections statewide, some of the most powerful gig worker protections in the country.
Are you upset that you haven't become a citywide villain? I feel like we have not caricatured you enough into like the puppet master. Like Lisa Bender took a lot of heat, and I feel like we're not doing the same to you. Do I have it correct, or do you feel like you're taking?
I think we live in different information bubbles than the Bender era. There are, I think, certain bubbles in the city that definitely see me as the villain. At least, maybe I should unsubscribe from that all of Minneapolis newsletter, because I see my name villainized frequently. But I think actually one of the realities is that when it was the Bender administration, the president was truly a powerful figure in our institution. And I think that it is increasingly hard to make that claim right now with a strong mayor system.
Right. Let's call Elliott Payne. Elliott Payne answers the phone. Well, this is the first I'm hearing about it. Call the mayor. Do you have comments on the mayor's race? Can I get you to make an endorsement? Can we say something interesting here at the end? No one's listening.
I am focused on my endorsement. Like I said, the caucus is on April 8th at 7 p.m. at Edison High School. The convention is on April 26th. The thing I'm really excited about for the mayor's race is that we have 3 really good choices, and you don't have to choose the lesser of evils here. You can make some very sound choices. I can say great things about the 3 that I'm most familiar with. I'm not as familiar with some of the other folks in the race, but like I work really well with Emily Koski. One of my first big things that I did in office was expand BCR by using some ARPA funds to buy some additional vans so that we could have citywide coverage. Emily Koski co-authored that with me at some of the most heightened time of like this kind of like false fund versus defund era of our local politics. Going back to Uber and Lyft being one of the more powerful things I feel like I've ever accomplished in life, that didn't happen without Omar Fateh at the Capitol and being the strongest advocate and ally in fighting for workers and fighting for a future that is more just and fair. And I'm just getting to meet Dr. Dwayne Davis, and I've had one sit down with him, and he just seems like such a morally grounded, good human being that, some of that's just missing, of just having like decency and the willingness to work together and say hi and have a positive and productive relationship. And so I could see all 3 of those being really phenomenal mayors to work with. And I'm just excited to see how the race will play out.
I had that impression like the first maybe 10 minutes I was talking to him, or maybe it was because I watched some videos. He just seems, I asked him if he was too nice. I said, are you too nice for this?
His political origin story is DC though, so I'm sure he has a little bit of elbows up energy, if you know what I mean.
Is he concealing his meanness? Are we going to see a different side of Dwayne Davis?
I think we still have much to learn about all three candidates, and I'm excited to learn all of the ways that they show up.
So do you have any recommendations? You have no time, you have no life anymore, but do you still have time to do anything that you would like to recommend?
I make time to play Helldivers 2 with my wife and my brother and my sister-in-law every weekend.
Well, tell us about Helldivers 2.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. It's kind of in the kind of almost cinematic universe of Starship Troopers, and it is it's a hilarious take on fascism, which is becoming increasingly not that funny because of the reality of fascism like seeping into our society right now. But you just kill bugs and robots and squids and have a blast doing it and get ragdolled, and it's the funnest game I've played in a long time.
Yeah,
Highly recommend.
I'm always delighted when you tell about your wife playing video games, perhaps more than you.
Yeah, well, and we play on the weekends because my brother and sister-in-law are in Taiwan on the other side of the world. So we play at night and they play in the morning, or vice versa.
Elliott Payne, Council President Elliott Payne, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.